Okay, welcome back to the second module of Encountering the World's Religions. Last week we dealt with the whole idea of what it means to approach a religion or religions in an academic way. I think that's very important. Now, let me come back and say that yes, I definitely come from a Christian worldview, and in particular at King here, coming from a Reformed Christian worldview. But now as we approach this class, I want to step back and I want to invite us to step back and take a bit more of an objective perspective. We talked about this in Bible Study That Matters, and now I want to get into more of an objective approach as we look at different religions and even the religious impulse. We talked last week, you remember the PowerPoint, where we said that in many ways the study of religion is about 200 to 300 years old. It's really a brand new exercise in the scheme of history. In the past, when people talked about religion, they talked about theology. Now we talk about religion, and that's a big shift because in many ways, and this is way too simple, but when we talk about theology, we're talking about religion from an insider's perspective. When we talk about religion or the study of religion or the academic study of religion, now we're stepping out and we're taking more of an objective perspective, or at least trying to take an objective perspective. So I want you to hear that in this class, I think it's very important. If you had other professors, you may have a class like this and they would show you what's wrong with the different religions. I'm not going to do that. Now, do I disagree? Yes, I do. But what I want us to do is to try to understand these religions as they are from an academic perspective, to really understand them without value judgments. It goes without saying that yes, I do come from a Christian worldview, and I have a lot of convictions about that, a lot of passion about that, but also want us to be fair and academic and objective as we approach this topic. So we saw that in the last, especially 150 years, we've had people like Max Weber, and we've had Freud and Clifford Geertz and Scott Atran. These are people who are standing out, and they're trying to use a theory and a method to understand different religions and even the religious impulse. Now, we're going to transition in Module 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're not going to forget, I hope, what we learned in Module 1, which is how to study academically and how to study with a theory. And by the way, I want you to be thinking about this. We have a project that's due the last week. I'm going to invite you to write a research paper, 5 to 8 pages, 5 to 7, and or I want you to do a 1,600 word blog post. Now be careful, because you think, well, 1,600 words, I can do that. The blog post will be a little bit more difficult, so don't think that it's any easier, but this will be your final project. And what you're going to do is you're going to take a religion or an aspect of religion or an element of religion or a symbol in religion, and I want you to study that in an academic way. In other words, I want you to look at it like an anthropologist or a sociologist or a psychologist or a phenomenologist, standing outside of that religion, trying to understand it for what it is as a human creative endeavor, as a cultural artifact. And so that's a few weeks away, but it's going to come quickly. I want you to keep that in mind as we go through these 5 modules. I want you to think about, what would you really like to study? And even though you may approach it from an insider perspective, that's fine with me. I still want you to use a theory, a method, as you approach this particular religion. So now we turn our attention to the 2 major religions for this week, and that is Hinduism and Buddhism. There's a lot that we're going to learn this week. I want to begin with the idea, though, that most people misunderstand Hinduism and Buddhism. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that especially people who adhere to another religion, they disagree with Hinduism and Buddhism, and so they look for ways to say, well, that's really stupid, or that doesn't make sense, or why did they do that, and we do this. And again, from an academic perspective, I want you to see that we're just going to try to understand them. And what would it mean to be born as a Hindu in India? And to be raised in that manner, and what does it mean for them to be Hindu, and what would it mean to be in Japan and to be a Buddhist? Let's try to understand what's going on with these religions. In the first place, I want you to know that as we approach these two religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, we need to know that these are Eastern religions. These are Asian religions. And I know that's problematic because a lot of people who use Western and Eastern, many times they use it in such a way that Western is better than Eastern. I don't want to do that. All I'm saying is I think there is a difference in the West, North America, South America to a degree, Europe. There is a difference from the East, in particular now with Asia and India. And so these are Eastern religions, these are Asian religions, and there's an entirely different mindset. So when I teach world religions, a lot of times my students have a real problem understanding the Eastern religions because it's so much outside of our worldview as Westerners. And so as we approach this, keep your mind open, look for the nuances, and see in many ways not only how different they are, but try to get into how they think. All right, let's take each religion, real quick overview, and then we'll get into the week. Hinduism. Hinduism is our oldest religion as far as we know. And I don't want to use the word organized, but most scholars place Hinduism maybe as old as 4,500, 5,000 years. And some scholars will even take it back to what we call the Indus civilization. And so Hinduism is very old. There are at this point anywhere from about 900 million to 1 billion people who would call themselves Hindu or Hindi. What is Hinduism about? Well, essentially, there are a few terms that we'll keep coming back to. In the first place, as far as the human condition, and we're going to do this with every religion, as far as the human condition is concerned, humans are in trouble. But what is the problem? The problem, according to Hinduism, is human beings live in ignorance, and in particular, they live in what we call, or they call, samsara. Samsara is a Sanskrit word that means the wheel of life and death and rebirth and life and death and rebirth. And notice it's a wheel, it's a cycle. And in many regards, the human being is stuck in samsara. That's why reincarnation is so important to the Hindus, because each life that you live, if you live according to your dharma, all right, we'll see this word. If you live according to your dharma, which is your sacred duty, what you're supposed to do, if you live according to your dharma and you're faithful to that, then you will have good karma. You've all probably heard this word before. We kind of throw it around. We talk about good parking karma, bad parking karma, but that's not quite what it means. If we live a good life and we obey and keep the dharma, then we'll have good karma, especially in the next life. And so for the Hindi mindset, reincarnation is being reborn. That's kind of bad news. A lot of people in the West, when they talk about reincarnation, it's more of a good thing, like, wow, I got reincarnated. Not in Hinduism. It's a bad thing. You wake up, if you will, and here you are. You're back in the wheel of samsara. You're back in the wheel of life and death. Well, good karma will get you closer to enlightenment, closer to being folded back into the one. And so basically for the Hindus, salvation, or let's use this word, The solution for being born and stuck in samsara is to be delivered, to be enlightened, to be liberated. And you're not just necessarily liberated unto something, because to most Hindus, you're just folded back into the Brahman. You're folded back into what is just the universe. And so it's not really being saved or delivered unto something, it's being delivered out of samsara. And finally, you can get to a place where you no longer are stuck in the wheel of death and suffering. All right, we'll study this much more closely. Now, Buddhism. Buddhism is about 2,500 years old, and whereas we can't go back to a specific time with Hinduism, we can pretty much go back to Buddhism. And Buddhism is named after a follower. His name was actually Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha Gautama was born in what is now northern India, and he was born in, and I'm being really anachronistic here, he was born in the Hindu caste system, but eventually as he grew up, he leaves that because the religion doesn't work for him. And so Siddhartha Gautama eventually goes on a journey, the quest for enlightenment. And he wants enlightenment now, to be reincarnated in hundreds of reincarnations to eventually get out of samsara. That wasn't enough for him. He wanted enlightenment. He wanted to find out how to be happy. So one of the confusing things about Hinduism and Buddhism is they use a lot of the same terms. So Buddhists will talk about samsara, they'll talk about dharma, karma, so forth and so on. But Siddhartha Gautama will make a break. We think he was about maybe 30, 35 years old, and he will be awakened. That's the name Buddha. Buddha is just a Sanskrit word that means the awakened one. He will be awakened, and then for the next 40 to 45 years, he will go throughout northern India and parts of what is now today Nepal, and he will gather disciples and he will do teachings, and then he will die, and then his disciples will begin to write his words down in his sayings and stories and so forth. And this will be the birth of Buddhism 2,500 years ago. But as with all religions, eventually there are schisms and splits and splinters. Same's going to happen with Buddhism, and we'll get into that in just a few days. But it's important to understand that in Buddhism, the human problem or the human condition, what's wrong with the human condition is that people are blind. They live in ignorance. And so what is the solution? The solution is to become awake, to become enlightened, to see that the things we think are real are actually illusions, and to, in many ways, go to a higher spiritual plane of existence. So here we go. Let's begin with Hinduism and Buddhism in our next screencast.